I'm Christina Mendoza, 34 years old, with a PhD in hospital administration that took 8 years to earn. After running departments at 3 major hospitals, I was thrilled to accept the director position at Westlake Medical Center. But my excitement vanished when that arrogant executive snapped his fingers and ordered me to clean his office, not knowing who I really was. I complied silently, gathering evidence of his character while planning my next move. Before I continue this story, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if workplace justice satisfies your soul. My journey to Westlake Medical Center was anything but ordinary. I graduated top of my class at Johns Hopkins University, where I specialized in hospital efficiency systems that prioritized both cost savings and patient care. Over the next decade, I pioneered programs that saved millions of dollars across 3 different hospitals while simultaneously improving patient outcomes and satisfaction scores. My reputation for turning around troubled departments had earned me recognition in healthcare administration circles nationwide. When the board at Westlake Medical Center reached out with their offer, I was intrigued. They needed someone who could transform their organizational culture while maintaining their excellent reputation for clinical care. The position would require relocating across the country, but the challenge excited me. This would be my first role as executive director with complete oversight of all hospital operations. At 34, I would be one of the youngest hospital directors in the state. What made their offer unusual was their specific request that I observe operations incognito for 2 weeks before my official introduction to the staff. We want you to see Westlake as it truly operates day to day, the board chair explained. Not the polished version people present to a new boss. I thought it was brilliant. Nothing reveals true culture like anonymity. For this observation period, I strategically chose to dress casually. No power suits or designer dresses. Just simple slacks, comfortable blouses, minimal jewelry, and my hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. I would blend in as just another consultant or new administrative staff member. No one would suspect I was about to become their boss. The hospital itself was impressive. A 300-bed facility with state-of-the-art equipment, renowned specialists, and a Level 1 trauma center serving a large metropolitan area. From the outside, it appeared to be running smoothly, but the board had hinted at internal dysfunction that threatened their long-term sustainability. My job would be to identify and correct these issues before they impacted patient care. I spent my first weekend in town, settling into a temporary apartment provided by the hospital. The space was pleasant enough, but lacked personal touches that would make it feel like home. My fiancé, James, remained back east to finish his current project before joining me in 3 months. Our phone call that night revealed the strain this arrangement was already placing on our relationship. "I miss you," I told him, staring out my window at an unfamiliar skyline. "You've only been gone 2 days," he laughed, but I could hear the underlying concern in his voice. "This job will be worth it," I assured him, "as much for myself as for him. Once you're here, we'll make this city our home. I know you can do this, Christina. You were born for this role." His confidence bolstered mine, and I went to bed feeling ready for my first day of observation. Monday morning arrived with brilliant sunshine streaming through my blinds. I dressed in navy slacks and a simple white blouse, accessorized with only my engagement ring and a silver watch. Professional but unremarkable. Perfect for blending in. The hospital bustled with activity as I walked through the main entrance precisely at 8:30. I had been given a temporary ID badge listing me as Christina M., administrative consultant, and instructions to explore freely. My official office remained locked and empty, awaiting my formal introduction. Throughout that first day, I wandered between departments, clipboard in hand, observing interactions and processes. Most staff offered friendly nods, but remained focused on their tasks. A few were more welcoming, like Nurse Amelia Jackson from the emergency department, who assumed I was evaluating their workflows. "You'll find we're pretty efficient down here," she told me proudly. Though administration could learn a thing or two about responsiveness, I nodded noncommittally, making notes while mentally flagging this as interesting feedback. Dr. Wilson, the chief of surgery, briefly showed me their recently renovated surgical wing. State of the art, he explained. We fought hard for this upgrade. His emphasis on fought suggested conflict with administration over budgeting priorities. As the day progressed, I began noticing patterns. Despite the hospital's excellent reputation, internal dynamics showed clear dysfunction. There seemed to be a rigid hierarchy, with clinical staff often expressing frustration about administrative decisions. Communication between departments appeared strained, with frequent mentions of silos and territory. By late afternoon, I had identified several concerning issues: outdated documentation procedures in some departments, visible signs of staff burnout, particularly among nurses, and a surprising lack of collaboration between related services. Most notably, several staff members had made oblique references to upstairs, with expressions ranging from eye-rolling to outright disdain. I ended my first day in my temporary workspace, a small windowless office near Human Resources, where I could review my notes privately. The hospital clearly had tremendous potential, with dedicated medical professionals providing excellent care despite systemic obstacles. The question was whether those obstacles stemmed from processes, resources, or people. Tomorrow I would delve deeper. My second day began in the hospital cafeteria, where I purchased a large coffee and found a corner table to observe the morning shift change dynamics. The casual conversations around me revealed more than any formal interview could. Doctors complained about scheduling conflicts, nurses discussed staffing shortages, and administrative staff vented about last-minute demands from leadership. As I sipped my coffee, Nurse Amelia spotted me and asked to join my table. Her 12-hour night shift was ending, and she looked exhausted, but still managed a warm smile. "Finding what you need for your assessment?" she asked. I nodded. "Getting there. Everyone seems committed to patient care." "We are," she agreed, lowering her voice. Despite the challenges, when I asked what she meant, Amelia glanced around before explaining. "Leadership issues, particularly Richard Bennett in operations. He runs his department like a personal fiefdom. Everything bottlenecks through him, and he plays favorites while making everyone else jump through hoops." This was exactly the kind of insider perspective I needed. "How does that affect patient care?" I prompted. "Delays in everything from supply orders to maintenance requests. Staff burnout from constant policy changes without input. Good people leaving because they can't take his management style." She shrugged. "We compensate as best we can, but it creates unnecessary stress." I thanked her for her candor, making mental notes about this Richard Bennett person, who seemed to be at the center of multiple complaints. My plan for the day crystallized: observe different departments and watch for the ripple effects of this operational dysfunction. I didn't have to wait long for my first glimpse of Richard Bennett in action. While observing a routine morning meeting in the outpatient clinic, a well-dressed man in his 50s burst through the door, radiating impatience. His tailored suit and commanding presence immediately changed the room's atmosphere. Everyone sat straighter as he approached a young doctor who had been discussing scheduling concerns. "Dr. Parker, why aren't you following the new appointment templates?" he demanded without preamble, his voice carrying across the room. The young physician looked startled. "The templates don't allow enough time for complex cases, and my patients have been complaining about feeling rushed." "The templates were approved by the Efficiency Committee," Richard countered dismissively. "Your department is consistently running behind schedule, and it's affecting our metrics. But patient care quality is measured by our satisfaction scores, which include timeliness," Richard interrupted. "Implement the templates by next week, or we'll need to discuss your commitment to hospital protocols." I watched the doctor's face fall as Richard turned and left without waiting for a response. The tension he left behind was palpable, and several staff exchanged knowing glances that spoke volumes about how routine such interactions must be. Throughout the day, I witnessed more examples of Richard's management style. During a department head meeting, I noticed how he lavished attention on certain managers while barely acknowledging others. When budget allocations were discussed, Departments led by his apparent favorites received immediate approval for requests, while others were questioned extensively or denied outright. What troubled me most was how this behavior seemed normalized. No one challenged him directly, though I caught subtle eye rolls and resigned sighs. This suggested a culture where pushing back was either futile or potentially harmful to one's career. By the end of the day, my initial excitement about this new position had transformed into anxiety. The hospital had excellent medical staff dedicated to patient care, but the administrative culture appeared toxic in ways that would eventually undermine clinical excellence if left unchecked. That evening, I called James from my temporary apartment, needing to process my observations. "I'm starting to wonder if I've taken on more than I can handle," I admitted, curling up on my couch with a glass of wine. "The clinical side is strong, but there's a cancer in the administration that's spreading throughout the organization." "That's exactly why they hired you," James reminded me. "They need someone who can diagnose and treat organizational disease." "But what if the patient refuses treatment?" I countered, thinking of Richard's apparent entrenchment and influence. "Then you implement a more aggressive intervention," he said simply. "You didn't become one of the top healthcare administrators in the country by backing down from challenges." His faith in me restored some of my confidence, but I still felt uneasy. This would be more than a simple organizational restructuring. It would require addressing deeply ingrained behavioral patterns and power dynamics. The next morning, I attended a department meeting where Richard was presenting operational updates. I sat quietly in the back, noting how he dominated the conversation and repeatedly shut down input from junior staff members. When a young woman from finance suggested a more efficient inventory system, he dismissed her idea without consideration, only to present something very similar 20 minutes later as his own concept. The meeting cemented my growing conviction that Richard Bennett represented the epicenter of Westlake's cultural problems. His behavior created fear instead of collaboration, stifled innovation, and rewarded loyalty over competence. The question was whether this was an isolated issue or indicative of broader leadership dysfunction. As my first week of observation concluded, I compiled my initial assessment. Westlake had exceptional clinical capabilities, undermined by administrative dysfunction. The hospital was essentially operating as two parallel organizations. The medical staff focused on patient care despite obstacles, and an administrative hierarchy more concerned with metrics than mission. Looking ahead to week 2, I resolved to focus specifically on operations, Richard's domain. If I was going to transform this hospital's culture, I needed to understand precisely how deep the dysfunction went and who might become allies in the necessary changes. Little did I know that my decision would lead to the most humiliating experience of my professional career. Monday morning of my second week began with a strategic decision. I would bring coffee to the operations floor and find a quiet corner to observe the department that seemed central to many of Westlake's issues. I dressed slightly more casually than the previous week, opting for khaki pants and a simple blue blouse, hoping to remain as invisible as possible while gathering information. The operations department occupied the entire 5th floor, with a series of cubicles surrounding a central area of offices with glass walls. Staff moved purposefully through the space, many looking tense and avoiding eye contact with each other. I positioned myself near a small conference table at the edge of the department, pretending to review documents while actually observing the interactions around me. 20 minutes into my observation, disaster struck. As I stood to refill my coffee cup, a harried staff member rounded the corner carrying a stack of files, colliding with me before either of us could react. My nearly full cup of coffee splashed across both of us, staining my blue blouse and creating a puddle on the polished floor. "I'm so sorry," the young woman gasped, looking horrified as she tried to salvage her now coffee-splattered paperwork. "Don't worry about it," I assured her, grabbing napkins from a nearby break station to blot at my blouse. "These things happen." As we both knelt to clean up the spill, a door slammed open. Richard Bennett emerged from his corner office, surveying the scene with obvious irritation. "What's going on out here?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the sudden silence of the department. The young woman began apologizing profusely, but Richard wasn't listening. His gaze had fixed on me, taking in my casual attire and the coffee stains spreading across my blouse. In that moment, I saw him make assumptions about who I was and my place in the hospital hierarchy. Then came the moment that would change everything. Richard snapped his fingers at me, like someone might summon a dog, and pointed first to the coffee spill, and then toward his office. "You! Clean up this mess, and then my office needs attention. The maintenance staff clearly isn't doing their job properly." The entire department froze. The young woman who had collided with me looked mortified, her eyes wide as she glanced between Richard and me. No one spoke. No one corrected his assumption. They simply watched, many with expressions of uncomfortable recognition, as if they'd witnessed similar scenes before. In that moment, I had a choice. I could identify myself as Cristina Mendoza, incoming executive director. I could put this man in his place immediately and establish my authority. Part of me desperately wanted to see the look on his face when he realized his mistake. But the strategic part of my brain, the part that had earned my PhD and propelled my career, recognized a rare opportunity. Richard Bennett had just shown me exactly who he was when he thought no one of consequence was watching, and he had inadvertently given me access to his inner sanctum, where I might find valuable insights into the operational dysfunction plaguing the hospital. So I swallowed my pride, blinked back the tears of humiliation threatening to form, and nodded silently. I finished cleaning the coffee spill while Richard stood over me, checking his watch impatiently. My hands trembled slightly with a mixture of shock, anger, and disbelief, but I forced them steady. The young woman tried to help, but Richard dismissed her. "Tracy, don't you have the quarterly reports to finish? Leave this and get back to work." As Tracy scurried away, Richard took a call on his cell phone, walking a few steps away but remaining close enough that I could hear his side of the conversation. "Yes, I'm still coming to golf on Saturday. No. The board meeting shouldn't be a problem. They'll approve whatever we put in front of them. Most of them don't even read the materials." He laughed. "Especially that new chairwoman. She's completely out of her depth." My jaw clenched at his dismissive attitude toward the very board that had hired me. When he finished his call, he pointed toward his office without making eye contact. "When you're done with that, my office needs straightening. The regular cleaning staff doesn't organize things properly." I nodded again and made my way to his corner office once the floor was dry. The space was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular views of the city. But the interior was chaotic. Papers covered every surface, empty coffee cups and food containers littered the credenza, and his desk was a mountain of disorganized files and sticky notes. As I began tidying, I discovered disturbing information. A half-hidden memo detailed how Richard had bypassed safety protocols to expedite a construction project in the pediatric wing. Another document showed staffing schedules with notes indicating certain employees were regularly scheduled for excessive overtime, well beyond what hospital policy allowed. A crumpled email revealed complaints about Richard's management had been filed but never addressed. I carefully committed these details to memory while organizing his space, making mental notes about filing systems and document locations. This information could prove invaluable once I assumed my official role. 20 minutes into my cleaning, Richard returned with 2 other men in suits, all engaged in animated conversation about budget allocations. They barely glanced at me, continuing their discussion as if I were invisible. "The nursing department is always complaining about staffing," Richard said dismissively. "They need to learn efficiency, not more headcount." One of the men nodded. "Speaking of which, who's the woman cleaning your office? New maintenance staff?" Richard shrugged without looking at me. "No idea. Found her upstairs when someone spilled coffee. Figured she could make herself useful in here too." The casual dehumanization stung even worse than the original finger snap. I was nothing more than a convenience, not even worth knowing by name or position. "That'll do," Richard said abruptly when I finished organizing his desk. "Leave the trash on your way out." I gathered the trash bag and walked out, feeling every eye in the department on me. The weight of their stares burned into my back as I made my way to the elevator. No one spoke to me. No one acknowledged what had happened. Their silence felt like complicity. Once alone in the elevator, I pressed the button for the lowest floor, desperate to escape prying eyes. I found myself in a deserted corridor near the hospital basement, where I finally let the tears flow. Leaning against the cold wall, I struggled to process the humiliation. In 15 years of education and professional work, I had never been treated with such blatant disrespect. The bathroom door nearby opened, and I quickly wiped my eyes. Nurse Amelia emerged, stopping short when she saw me. "Christina, are you okay?" Genuine concern filled her voice. "Just had an enlightening experience with Richard Bennett," I managed, trying to keep my voice steady. Understanding immediately dawned on her face. What did he do this time? I gave her the abbreviated version, watching her expression shift from sympathy to outrage. "That's absolutely unacceptable," she said firmly. "You should report him to HR. "Thank you for your concern," I replied, maintaining my cover. "I'm just taking a moment to collect myself." "This place," Amelia sighed, shaking her head. "So many amazing people working so hard for our patients, and then there's that. Someone needs to hold him accountable someday." "Someone will," I promised quietly, more certain of my purpose than ever. Back in my temporary office, I documented everything I'd observed in meticulous detail. The documents I'd seen, the conversations I'd overheard, the organizational issues I'd identified, and most importantly, Richard's behavior and its apparent acceptance throughout his department. What had begun as a humiliating experience had transformed into ironclad resolve. Westlake Medical Center needed more than minor adjustments. It needed a complete cultural reset, starting at the top of its administrative structure. And in 1 week, when I was officially introduced as executive director, I would begin that transformation. But first, I had more evidence to gather, more allies to identify, and a complete understanding of the system to develop. Richard Bennett had unknowingly handed me the perfect opportunity to see Westlake's true operational heart, and it was even more diseased than I had initially suspected. The remaining days of my observation period took on new urgency after the incident with Richard. I continued my undercover role with heightened awareness, now seeing patterns of behavior I might have missed before. Richard's influence extended far beyond his department, creating ripples of fear and dysfunction throughout the hospital. In the cafeteria one morning, I overheard 2 pharmacy technicians discussing a medication tracking system that frequently malfunctioned. "We've reported it to operations 6 times, one said in frustration. "Why bother?" her colleague replied. "Unless you're in Richard's inner circle, those requests disappear into a black hole." My cousin works at Memorial Hospital across town. Their operations department responds same day to critical systems issues. Different leadership, different results. Similar conversation echoed across department. Richard had created a system where personal loyalty trumped competence, where raising legitimate concerns was career suicide, and where resources flowed based on relationships rather than needs. Through strategic questions and observations, I identified clear favoritism patterns. Department heads who socialized with Richard received preferential treatment for budget requests and staffing. Those who challenged him found their departments consistently under-resourced. I arranged coffee with a nurse who had recently left Westlake for another hospital. Sarah had worked at Westlake for 12 years before resigning 3 months ago. "I loved the patients in my team," she explained, stirring her latte. "But the administrative obstacles became unbearable." "Was there a specific incident that made you leave?" I asked. Sarah hesitated. "I developed a patient safety protocol that received recognition from the State Nursing Association. Richard blocked its implementation because it would require changing processes in his department. 6 months later, he introduced a nearly identical protocol and took credit for it at the leadership conference." "Did you confront him?" "I tried. He said I was being emotional and suggested maybe nursing wasn't the right field for me if I was so concerned about recognition." Her voice tightened. 12 years of service, and that's how I was treated. Sarah wasn't alone. My investigation revealed at least 8 highly qualified staff members who had resigned in the past year, citing administrative issues as their primary reason for leaving. These departures had created critical shortages in several departments, compromising patient care despite heroic efforts from remaining staff. On Thursday afternoon, I attended a department meeting where Richard was presenting performance metrics. The numbers looked impressive until I noticed discrepancies in how they were calculated. Patient wait times excluded certain categories that would have negatively impacted the results. Cost savings claimed credit for reduced expenses that actually resulted from staffing vacancies rather than efficiency improvements. Most disturbing was a brief discussion about patient safety concerns in the emergency department. A physician attempted to address ambulance diversion rates due to staffing shortages. "We've had to divert 4 critical patients in the past month," he explained. "That's unprecedented for Westlake." Richard dismissed the concern with a wave of his hand. "Temporary staffing adjustments. The numbers are within acceptable parameters." "Acceptable parameters?" the physician repeated incredulously. "We're talking about critical care patients being sent to facilities 20 minutes further away. Dr. Graham, if you're uncomfortable with administrative decisions, perhaps you should focus on medicine and leave operations to those qualified to manage them." The room fell silent. Dr. Graham's face flushed with anger, but he said nothing more. The meeting moved on as if the exchange hadn't happened, but I noticed several staff members exchange knowing glances. That evening in my hotel room, I couldn't sleep. My growing dossier of policy violations, ethical concerns, and management failures painted a picture of systemic dysfunction centered around one man whose authority had gone unchecked for too long. The board had been right to be concerned, but they had significantly underestimated the extent of the problem. At 2 a.m, I called my mentor from Johns Hopkins, Dr. Eleanor Hayes, who had guided my early career. "You've walked into a hornet's nest," she said after I described the situation, careful to maintain confidentiality. "How do I fix a culture this broken?" I asked, my voice betraying my exhaustion and doubt. "The same way you'd approach a complex medical case," Eleanor replied. "Accurate diagnosis, clear treatment plan, firm boundaries, and consistent follow-through. You can't heal the organization without addressing the infection at its core. And if the patient resists treatment, then you must decide whether surgical intervention is necessary." The metaphor was clear. Some people cannot or will not change, regardless of opportunity or incentive. "I'm not sure I'm strong enough for this," I admitted, voicing my deepest fear. "Christina, I've known you since you were a graduate student challenging tenured professors about patient-centered care models. You are precisely strong enough. This hospital needs exactly who you are." Her confidence bolstered mine. I spent the remainder of the night developing my strategy for the board meeting and my first official day as executive director. By morning, I had a clear vision for transforming Westlake's culture, beginning with Richard's department. Friday afternoon, I called the board chairwoman to share preliminary findings without revealing the personal incident. "The clinical capabilities are excellent," I reported, "but the administrative culture requires significant intervention. There are concerning patterns of behavior that have created systemic dysfunction." "That aligns with our suspicions," she confirmed. "We're eager to hear your complete assessment at Monday's meeting. The department heads are expecting a routine introduction of our new director. They don't know you've been observing." "I think that's best," I agreed. Seeing the unfiltered operations has been invaluable. After our call, I allowed myself a moment of emotional release in my hotel room. The pressure of maintaining my cover while witnessing dysfunction, topped by personal humiliation, had taken its toll. I cried for the dedicated healthcare professionals trying to provide excellent care despite the obstacles placed in their path. I cried for the hospital that could be so much better than it was. And yes, I cried for myself, for the momentary loss of dignity I had experienced. When the tears subsided, I called James, needing his steady perspective. "Monday's the big reveal," I told him. "I'm equal parts terrified and determined." "They hired you because you're the best person for this job," he reminded me. "Trust your training and your instincts." "What if I can't change the culture? What if it's too entrenched?" Then you'll have tried your best, and you'll know it wasn't the right environment. But Christina, I've never seen you back down from a challenge, especially when patient care is at stake. He was right. This wasn't just about my experience or my career. It was about creating an environment where healthcare professionals could do their best work for the people who needed them most. The weekend passed in a blur of preparation. I reviewed my notes, organized my observations into clear categories of concern, and prepared a presentation outlining my vision for Westlake's future. I rehearsed potential responses to various reactions, particularly from Richard. I selected my outfit with care: a tailored charcoal suit, silk blouse, and the pearl necklace my grandmother had given me when I earned my doctorate. Professional, authoritative, but not intimidating. Sunday night, I stood before the mirror in my hotel room, practicing my introduction and visualizing the coming confrontation. I imagined Richard's face when he realized who I was, rehearsed my responses to his potential reactions, and centered myself in my purpose. "You are Christina Mendoza, PhD," I told my reflection. "You are qualified, you are prepared, and you are exactly what this hospital needs." Tomorrow would be challenging, potentially uncomfortable, but ultimately necessary for Westlake's future. I went to bed with a calm resolve that had replaced my earlier anxiety. Whatever happened next, I was ready. Monday morning dawned bright and clear, a perfect contrast to the storm I anticipated at the board meeting. I dressed with deliberate care, applying minimal makeup that emphasized professionalism rather than beauty. My hair, which had been in a simple ponytail during my observation period, was now styled in a sleek chignon. The transformation was complete. No one looking at me now would mistake me for anything but what I was: an accomplished executive prepared to lead. I arrived at the boardroom 30 minutes early, wanting to settle myself in the space before others arrived. The room was impressive, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a massive mahogany table that could seat 20. Photographs of Westlake's history lined one wall, reminding everyone of the institution's long commitment to healthcare excellence. Board members began arriving 15 minutes before the scheduled start. They greeted me warmly, many expressing excitement about my official introduction to the hospital leadership. None of them knew about my experience with Richard, and I had decided not to share it until I had addressed it with him directly. Similar conversation echoed across department. Richard had created a system where personal loyalty trumped competence, where raising legitimate concerns was career suicide, and where resources flowed based on relationships rather than needs. I nodded, reviewing my notes one final time as my heart rate accelerated slightly. This moment would set the tone for my entire tenure at Westlake. At precisely 9 o'clock, the boardroom doors opened and hospital leadership filed in. I recognized many faces from my 2 weeks of observation. Dr. Wilson from surgery, the chief financial officer whose budget meeting I had attended, the director of nursing who had fought unsuccessfully for additional staffing. They nodded politely, seeing me as just another board member or consultant. Richard Bennett entered last, walking with the confident stride of someone who expected deference. He greeted several board members by name, his charm fully deployed. He didn't glance in my direction, having no reason to connect the polished executive at the board table with the woman he had ordered to clean his office. The board chair called the meeting to order and moved directly to the introduction. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this morning. As you know, we've been searching for a new executive director to lead Westlake into its next chapter of excellence. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Christina Mendoza, who will be assuming this role effective immediately." She gestured toward me, and all eyes in the room turned my direction. Dr. Mendoza comes to us with an exceptional background in healthcare administration, having transformed departments at 3 major institutions. Her innovative approaches to operational efficiency and staff development have been recognized nationally. Please join me in welcoming her to Westlake. Polite applause filled the room as I stood to address the group. Most faces showed interest or curiosity. Richard's expression, however, transformed in stages. Initial professional interest, followed by confusion as he tried to place my now familiar face, and finally, unmistakable shock as recognition dawned. His complexion paled visibly, and he swallowed hard, his confident posture suddenly rigid. "Thank you for that kind introduction," I began, my voice steady and warm. "I'm honored to join this exceptional institution and work alongside such dedicated professionals." I paused, making eye contact with various leaders around the table before continuing. "What many of you don't know is that I've actually been at Westlake for the past 2 weeks, observing daily operations and getting to know our systems from the ground up. This approach has given me valuable insights into both our strengths and our opportunities for growth." Murmurs rippled through the room as department heads processed this revelation. Richard shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes now fixed on the table in front of him. I continued with my presentation, outlining my observations about Westlake's clinical excellence and dedicated staff. I acknowledged the challenges of healthcare delivery in today's environment and commended the team's commitment to patient care despite obstacles. Then I shifted to my vision for Westlake's future, emphasizing collaborative leadership, transparent communication, and a culture of respect that would permeate every level of the organization. "In my experience," I said, looking around the table, "the most effective healthcare organizations are those where every staff member, regardless of role or title, feels valued and heard, where ideas are evaluated based on merit rather than source, where respect is the foundation of every interaction." Richard's discomfort was palpable, but he maintained his composure, even nodding slightly at appropriate moments, as if in agreement with these principles. I concluded with specific initiatives I plan to implement in my first 100 days, including a comprehensive operational assessment, staff feedback mechanisms, and leadership development opportunities. As the presentation ended, board members and department heads expressed enthusiasm for this new direction, many offering immediate support for various aspects of the plan. As the meeting concluded, Richard attempted to exit quickly, but I had anticipated this. "Richard," I called, my voice pleasant but firm. "Could you stay for a moment? I'd like to discuss operations priorities." He had no choice but to comply with this reasonable request from his new boss. As others filed out, offering congratulations and welcome, Richard remained by the doorway, visibly uncomfortable. When we were finally alone, I closed the boardroom door and turned to face him. "Please, have a seat," I said, gesturing to the chair nearest mine. Richard sat stiffly, his usual confidence nowhere in evidence. "Dr. Mendoza, I want to congratulate you on your appointment. Operations is fully prepared to support your initiatives." "Thank you, Richard. Before we discuss departmental priorities, I believe we have a previous interaction to address." His eyes darted away from mine. "Previous interaction?" "Yes. Last Monday on the operations floor, when you snapped your fingers at me and ordered me to clean up a coffee spill and then your office." Richard's face flushed deep red. "Dr. Mendoza, there seems to have been a misunderstanding. I didn't realize who you were." "That's precisely the point," I replied calmly. "You didn't know who I was, so you felt it was appropriate to snap your fingers at another human being and issue commands without basic courtesy." "I was under considerable pressure that day," he began, defensive now. The quarterly reports were due, and the board meeting preparations. I held up a hand. "Richard, would it have been appropriate for you to snap your fingers at anyone, regardless of their position? Would you have behaved that way toward the janitor, even if I were one?" His silence was answer enough. "Let me be clear," I continued. "My concern isn't that you disrespected someone who turned out to be your boss. My concern is that you believe it's acceptable to disrespect anyone based on perceived status or role in this organization." Richard shifted in his seat. "What exactly are you saying, Dr. Mendoza?" "I'm saying that the culture you've created in operations, and by extension throughout administration, is contrary to everything Westlake should represent. I've spent 2 weeks observing patterns of favoritism, intimidation, dismissal of legitimate concerns, and misrepresentation of performance metrics." His eyes widened slightly at the specificity of my accusations. "You have 2 choices moving forward," I explained. my tone professional but unyielding. You can commit to genuine change, which will include leadership coaching, 360-degree feedback, and measurable improvement in departmental culture. Or you can tender your resignation, which the board will accept without prejudice. You're giving me an ultimatum on your first official day? Indignation crept into his voice. I'm offering you an opportunity on my first official day, I corrected. An opportunity that I suspect few in your position would extend, given what I've observed. Richard was silent for a long moment, clearly calculating his options. Finally, he nodded. I understand. I would prefer to remain with Westlake, and am willing to adapt my approach. I'm glad to hear that, I replied. You'll find I'm a fair leader who believes in second chances and growth opportunities. But make no mistake, Richard. There will be accountability, and changes must be substantial and sustained. Understood. We'll meet tomorrow morning to outline specific expectations and timelines. For now, I suggest you take the remainder of the day to reflect on the kind of leader you want to be remembered as at Westlake. Richard stood. His usual commanding presence diminished, but not entirely gone. Dr. Mendoza, he said, pausing at the door. For what it's worth, I apologize for my behavior last week. I acknowledged his apology with a nod, recognizing it as a small but significant first step. After he left, I allowed myself a moment to absorb what had just transpired. The confrontation had gone as well as could be expected, but the real work was just beginning. Changing a deeply ingrained culture would require far more than a single conversation, no matter how pointed. By afternoon, word had spread throughout the hospital about the new director who had been working among them incognito for 2 weeks. Predictably, the story of Richard's finger-snapping incident had leaked as well, likely from someone in operations who had witnessed it. As I walked through the hospital corridors, I noticed staff watching me with new interest, and from many, poorly concealed admiration. I addressed the gossip directly in my first all-staff email. You may have heard various stories about my observation period at Westlake. While I can't address specific incidents, I can confirm that my approach was designed to understand our true operational culture. Moving forward, my door is open to every member of this organization, regardless of role or department. At Westlake, every position is essential, every voice matters, and every interaction should reflect the respect we owe each other as healthcare professionals. That message set the tone for what would become known as the Mendoza era at Westlake Medical Center. The transformation had begun. The first month of my leadership brought more challenges than I had anticipated, but also more opportunities. I established new communication protocols that eliminated traditional hierarchical barriers. Department heads were required to hold regular open forums where staff could raise concerns without fear of reprisal. I implemented an anonymous feedback system that allowed employees to highlight issues ranging from safety concerns to suggestions for efficiency improvements. Richard, as expected, initially resisted these changes. His weekly reports emphasized metrics that made his department look successful while downplaying ongoing issues. In meetings, he would agree with initiatives publicly, but then create subtle roadblocks during implementation. His passive-aggressive approach was clever but transparent to someone watching for it. After witnessing this pattern for 3 weeks, I scheduled a private meeting with him. Richard, I began once we were seated in my office. We seemed to have a disconnect between our conversations and subsequent actions. He offered a practiced look of confusion. I'm not sure I understand. Let me be specific. You agreed to expedite the equipment requests for the emergency department, yet those requests are still pending in your approval queue. You committed to revising the supply chain protocol, but your team has informed department heads that no changes will be implemented until next quarter. Richard started to respond, but I continued, laying out 5 more examples of his resistance to change, complete with dates, times, and specific actions. This pattern isn't sustainable, I concluded. As we discussed in our initial conversation, your continued role at Westlake depends on genuine change, not performative compliance. That direct confrontation marked a turning point in Richard's approach. Perhaps he realized I was documenting his resistance, Or maybe he finally accepted that the old ways wouldn't work under new leadership. Whatever the reason, his behavior began to shift from passive resistance to cautious engagement. Meanwhile, I conducted one-on-one meetings with each department head, building alliances with those committed to positive change while identifying areas where additional support was needed. Dr. Wilson from surgery became an unexpected advocate, appreciating the more transparent budget process that finally addressed long-standing equipment needs. For years, we've been told there wasn't funding for updated cardiac monitoring, he told me after one leadership meeting. Suddenly, when the request process is transparent, the funds appear. Interesting coincidence. Nurse Amelia, who had shown me kindness during my observation period, was promoted to emergency department manager based on her clinical excellence and leadership skills. Her perspective from the front lines proved invaluable as we restructured patient flow processes. The most significant breakthrough with Richard came during a departmental review session where his team presented their current projects and challenges. For the first time, Richard allowed his staff to lead the presentation, stepping back as they articulated concerns directly to me without his filtering. When one team member mentioned struggling with an outdated inventory system, Richard surprised everyone by acknowledging the issue. "She's right. We've been patching that system for years when we should have replaced it. My department needs to take responsibility for that oversight." The room fell momentarily silent at this unprecedented admission. I caught Richard's eye and nodded slightly, acknowledging this important step. That small moment led to a larger one the following week. I arranged a mediation session between Richard and several department heads who had historically struggled with operations. The conversation was initially tense, with years of frustration bubbling just beneath the surface. "Every request becomes an argument," the pharmacy director explained. "We're treated like we're asking for luxury items when we're talking about basic needs for patient care." Rather than becoming defensive, Richard listened. When everyone had spoken, he took a deep breath. "I owe you all an apology," he said, his voice uncharacteristically humble. "I've approached these relationships as competitions rather than collaborations. That ends today." He proceeded to outline specific changes to request procedures, approval timelines, and communication protocols that would address many of the long-standing frustrations. The shift was remarkable. Though skepticism remained, it was tempered with cautious hope. As these changes unfolded, I implemented hospital-wide training on workplace respect and professional communication. Every employee, from environmental services to the executive team, participated in sessions designed to establish a common language and expectations around workplace interactions. Not everyone embraced the new direction. Several middle managers who had thrived under the old system resisted changes that threatened their fiefdoms. I addressed resistance directly, offering support for those willing to adapt while making it clear that the transformation was non-negotiable. By the end of the third month, measurable improvements were evident throughout the hospital. Staff retention numbers had stabilized after years of decline. Patient satisfaction scores showed modest but consistent improvement. Most importantly, the atmosphere had shifted from resignation to cautious optimism. Richard's personal transformation continued to surprise me. During a particularly tense board meeting, where a member criticized emergency department response times, Richard unexpectedly spoke up. "Those numbers don't reflect the extraordinary work being done under challenging circumstances," he stated firmly. "I've personally observed their processes, and the issue isn't staff performance but resource allocation, which my department is working to address." Dr. Graham, the emergency physician whose concerns Richard had dismissed in the meeting I observed during my undercover period, looked stunned at this defense. After the meeting, I overheard Richard and Dr. Graham continuing the conversation, with Richard asking specific questions about emergency department needs rather than dictating solutions. That evening, I called James, who was finalizing plans to join me the following month. "Something remarkable is happening here," I told him. "People are changing in ways I didn't think possible." "Including Richard the Terrible?" he asked, using the nickname we'd created during my observation period. "Especially him. It's not perfect, and I'm not naive enough to think a leopard completely changes its spots, but he's making genuine efforts. That speaks to your leadership, James observed. You gave him a clear choice and a real opportunity, rather than just pushing him out. The jury's still out on whether it was the right call, I admitted. But seeing the potential for change in someone I had written off has been humbling. By the 6-month mark, Richard had implemented new operational procedures that emphasized staff support rather than control. His team reported increased job satisfaction, and turnover in operations had dropped to its lowest level in 5 years. The efficiency programs I had pioneered at previous hospitals were adapted for Westlake, with careful attention to maintaining care quality while reducing unnecessary processes. Richard, surprisingly, became one of the strongest advocates for these changes, applying his considerable organizational knowledge to identify implementation opportunities. In our 6-month assessment meeting with the board, the metrics told a compelling story. Staff satisfaction had increased 23%. Patient complaints had decreased 17%. Operational costs had reduced by 8%, while care quality indicators had improved across all departments. Dr. Mendoza, the board chair, said as the meeting concluded, "When we recruited you, we hoped for improvement. What you've delivered is transformation." I glanced at Richard, seated across the table. The credit belongs to the entire leadership team and their willingness to embrace change, even when difficult. As we left the boardroom, Richard paused in the hallway. "I almost resigned that first day," he admitted. "My pride wanted me to walk away, rather than acknowledge how wrong I had been." "I'm glad you didn't," I replied honestly. "So am I," he said, "though I still wake up some nights remembering that finger snap." I laughed. "So do I, Richard. So do I." 6 months became a year, and the transformation at Westlake Medical Center continued to exceed expectations. What had begun as a toxic work environment had evolved into a collaborative culture focused on excellence in patient care and staff support. The change was palpable to anyone who entered the hospital, from the warmth of the reception staff to the efficient cooperation between departments. We celebrated these improvements with an all-staff gathering in the hospital auditorium. The room buzzed with energy as employees from every department mingled, many forming connections across traditional boundaries that would have been unthinkable in the previous culture. Standing at the podium surveying the crowd, I felt profound gratitude for the journey we had taken together. "1 year ago," I began, "I walked into Westlake as a stranger, observing a hospital with tremendous potential hindered by unnecessary obstacles. Today, I look around and see an institution that has embraced its full capacity for excellence." I highlighted specific achievements: reduced wait times in the emergency department, improved patient satisfaction scores, decreased staff turnover, and most importantly, enhanced quality of care metrics across all services. These accomplishments belong to every person in this room, I emphasized. From our environmental services team ensuring patient safety through immaculate facilities, to our surgeons performing life-saving procedures, to our administrative staff who keep everything running smoothly. Westlake's excellence is built on the contribution of each individual. What happened next surprised everyone, including me. Richard approached the microphone, having requested a moment to speak. "Most of you know that Dr. Mendoza and I had an inauspicious beginning," he said, prompting knowing chuckles from the audience. "What you may not know is that I was given a choice: change or leave. Many leaders in her position would have shown me the door immediately, and no one would have questioned that decision." He paused, his usual confident demeanor replaced by genuine humility. The fact that Westlake is thriving today is testament not only to Dr. Mendoza's leadership skills, but to her belief that people can change, systems can improve, and an organization can transform without losing its identity. Richard's public acknowledgement of his past mistakes marked a significant milestone in our collective journey. It demonstrated to everyone that accountability and growth were not just theoretical concepts, but lived values at the new Westlake. As the year progressed, I found myself reflecting often on the lessons this experience had taught me about power dynamics in the workplace. The incident with Richard had been humiliating, but it had also provided invaluable insight into how authority can corrupt and how easily disrespect becomes normalized in hierarchical environments. This understanding informed every aspect of my leadership approach. I instituted policies that explicitly valued contributions from all levels of the organization. When environmental services staff suggested a modified cleaning schedule that would reduce disruptions to patient care, their proposal was implemented hospital-wide with full credit to the team. When a first-year resident identified a potential improvement to medication reconciliation procedures, she was invited to lead the task force developing the new protocol. My personal life had stabilized as well. James had relocated as planned and was thriving in his new position at a local architectural firm. One evening over dinner in our now permanent home, he observed how different I seemed compared to my early days at Westlake. "You were so stressed those first few months," he recalled. "Now you seem, I don't know, more grounded, more certain." This experience forced me to clarify what kind of leader I want to be, I explained. The finger-snapping moment could have made me bitter or vengeful. Instead, it became a catalyst for creating something better. Plus, he added with a smile, you got to see the look on Richard's face when he realized who you were. That must have been priceless. I laughed. It was satisfying in the moment, but honestly, watching his genuine growth has been far more rewarding. Perhaps the most surprising development was the unexpected mentorship relationship that evolved between Richard and me. His decades of experience in healthcare operations, once applied to maintaining his power, now served as valuable insight for innovative approaches. He began sharing knowledge generously with younger staff, becoming a respected advisor rather than a feared boss. During a regional healthcare conference where Westlake presented its transformation journey, Richard approached me during a break. "I was just thinking about how differently things might have turned out," he said quietly. "If you had exposed me in front of everyone that first day, or if you had fired me immediately." "We'll never know," I replied, "but I believe in the path we chose." "I was a terrible leader," he acknowledged. "I confused fear with respect, control with leadership. And now I understand that true authority comes from lifting others up, not pushing them down." He shook his head slightly. "It took someone cleaning my office to teach me that." The ripple effects of Westlake's cultural transformation extended beyond our walls. Other hospitals in the region began sending representatives to learn about our approaches to staff engagement and operational efficiency. I received invitations to speak at healthcare conferences about culture change and leadership development. When hiring new staff, I implemented processes that evaluated character and interpersonal skills alongside technical qualifications. "We can teach systems and procedures," I explained to department heads, "but respect and collaboration must be foundational." The bond between Nurse Amelia and me had strengthened over time. Her promotion to emergency department manager had proven to be an excellent decision, as she brought both clinical expertise and emotional intelligence to the role. During one of our regular check-in meetings, she reflected on the changes. "You know what stands out most?" she asked. "It's not just that processes work better now, it's that people actually want to come to work. They feel seen and valued." "That was always the goal," I told her. "Systems don't heal patients, people do, and people perform at their best when they're respected." As I approach the 2-year anniversary of joining Westlake, I often reflect on the danger of judging people by appearance or position. Had Richard known my identity that day, he would have behaved entirely differently. His true character was revealed precisely because he thought I was just a cleaning person, someone he could dismiss without consequences. That insight has been the foundation of Westlake's new culture, the recognition that every role is essential, every interaction matters, and true leadership requires humility rather than arrogance. For those of you facing similar challenges in your workplace, remember that transformation begins with individual choices to treat others with dignity, regardless of their title or position. Have you ever experienced workplace disrespect? How did you handle it? Share your story in the comments below. And if this journey of accountability and transformation resonated with you, please subscribe to hear more real-life experiences. Thank you for listening. And remember that sometimes our most difficult moments become our most powerful opportunities for growth and change.